All right, so before we launch the panel, just for the sake of kind of knowing the context and the audience, who here is not currently involved in the FIDO community? Okay, great. Who here is not currently involved with the FIDO community? All right, great. Cool. Because if we were down to mostly FIDO people, I actually would be doing a slightly different panel. So, all right. So anyway, so the panel that we have ending today, the name of it is FIDO, How the Ecosystem Grows. And the idea being that we wanted to talk about how to get involved in FIDO, talk about some of the experiences that the folks up here have had as they've gotten involved in the community, and what we can do to be able to bring people in, as well as, I think, connect with upstream communities with whom we might want to be doing work. Because I hope that we've inspired folks here who are not currently involved with FIDO to maybe consider it, or consider within their own community wanting to continue to work with us. So we have got 3 panelists, and so first I will, they've pretty much all sort of introduced themselves in various ways today, but if you just want to kind of go through with a little bit more context on what your involvement with FIDO is, and kind of how you came into the community and how long you've been in the community.
My name is Qing. I work in Huawei. We mostly work in the virtual networking related data path project. I joined the FIDO not long ago because we recently, the DMM project becomes probably the newest project in the FIDO community. It just happened last March. That's how I joined the FIDO, and things has been pretty good because we get a lot of help from the peoples in the FIDO, and we're hoping to do it much better in the future.
Okay, so I'm Marco Varlese and work for SUSE, as I said earlier. I think I approached the community May 2016 after ONS, since after I spoke to Ed at the time. The main goal for me was to get support for SUSE as a distribution for VPP upstream, so that basically our distribution can be supported at integration, like with Jenkins and in the CI/CD, and ultimately also for performance testing. After that, I really wanted to basically put my hands on the source code of VPP. So again, I reached out again to Ed, who is, I'm afraid, was my target person. To basically
raise your hand if you think of Ed as a target. Yes. And that's why we won't arm you.
And he suggested at the time to go ahead and look at Genevi as another tunnel protocol implementation. So I went off and got that in. And after that, I was proposed to look at SCTP, which again got merged, as I said, sometimes end of January. After that, I was really pleased to get nominated for as a VPP committer by the community, and I'm pleased to be part of the VPP committers group and the community, the wider community as well. So that's me, a little bit of history.
Cool. So my name is Brian Brooks. I'm a software engineer at ARM. I started getting involved with FIDO as well as engineers from our partner companies around fall of last year. And really the goal was to see if it ran on ARM-based platforms and how well it runs on ARM-based platforms, and to get integrated into a lot of these upstream projects like CI and CSIT to make sure that it continues to run well and be relatively stable. So.
Cool. Great. And so before we go on, I have some questions, but I really like panels that are interactive and panels where we engage with sort of each other. You know, it's not just answer question, that we engage with each other up here and that we engage with y'all out in the audience. So to that end, Ed is going to be entrusted with this microphone to run around as people have questions. So, yeah, this may be a good idea or a bad idea to give Ed this power, but. All right. So, you know, I think it's interesting. You know, we've got, you know, especially someone here who's just a month into sort of the process. Knowing that you had not been involved in the FIDO kind of community before, and you were coming in to sort of lead a new project, you know, what were the, you know, instead of someone who'd been in there sort of taking on a project, what are some of the things that, you know, have helped enable you to do that, and what things would have been nice if that didn't exist if they did exist?
Well, I think most help from the people in the FIDO community, like Ed, so always help us, tell us which direction to go, which person to contact, how to approach some problem. And some other people, like Florian, I remember when first time I sent email to him, I got a response in like 15 minutes. That's like faster than my colleague.
And anyone who sends email to me, it's faster than you're going to get an email response from me too. So,
so that's just an example that how much help we got from the people in the community, and always the people is the what really happens in the community, not the source code. That's really helped tremendously.
Yeah. So I kind of you had sort of a different experience. You had more of the sort of coming in and kind of I guess maybe growing up sort of over the past couple years in the community. What were some of the things that sort of enabled you or inspired you to sort of continue to take on kind of more responsibility and kind of leadership as you were in FIDO?
Yeah. For me, for sure, coming from a software engineering background, definitely like the software itself. Like it was really, I was really interested, and that's why I approached the source code of VPP about the design, the architecture, and how it works. Also because coming from a little bit of a more hardware background per se, having worked for Intel for quite a long time, the software was almost all the time written as a translator of the hardware. So people are familiar with the TCAM, and software was sometimes looking at as a TCAM itself, while VPP reorganized the thoughts, actually completely changed the approach and made it a software as it should be. So I was fascinated by that, and that's why I can approach the community. I joined and took on more work to do.
I was going to say, and then Brian, you're sort of in the middle. You know, you've kind of come in with a, you know, sort of also, I think, relatively focused goal of, you know, making sure things work on ARM. You know, in kind of early days, you know, there weren't a lot of, you know, ARM or ARM ecosystem participants. You know, what's your experience, you know, kind of been like? You know, challenges, successes, anything like that?
Yeah. So it started off by doing a git clone and then make build release, and it didn't build. I mean, so it's been everything from, like, you know, just understanding build related things that may prevent compilation from happening, to understanding where people are in the community and who to talk to, thanks to Ed. and also people's communication styles. So whether a phone call is best, or IRC, or email, frequency of communication. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And do you think, I mean, so all of you on your kind of like onboarding and getting involved experiences, trying to look at sort of, as the community scales, we saw those nice numbers going up and to the right at the kickoff presentation this morning. What do you think that we as a community should maybe start thinking about doing as we want to maybe ramp more and more people, on this? At some point, the ed might become sort of he's a non-infinite resource over there. Ed has a lot of energy, but are there things that you think that we should be doing or be thinking about?
So one thing that just comes to mind is like some projects will have a maintainers list. I think there's like a wiki page for like if it's this general area, go to this person, but there's maybe like a couple people. From a code perspective, I mean, you can do a git log or git blame to find out, but maybe something more official.
I did the initial check-in when it went open source, and so the result is an inordinate percentage of the code is improperly blamed on me.
Cool. I think there's no such thing as improper blame on you. All right, so maintainer list, so that it's easier to know the people to go to without having to get. Any other things that like if something had been in place when you came in that would have made it easier, that maybe we can think about, sort of implementing in the future.
Well, another thing actually good in with the FIDO community is we got a lot of video recordings of previous trainings, discussions. That helps a lot. And documentation, usually you cannot do too much. More is always better. And sometimes there's a obsolete documentation that it would be nice that it keep updated as the time goes.
So anyone, I'll go on and start opening it to the audience. Any questions out there? All right.
Thanks. It's more of a part question, part comment. I mean, essentially VPP has two big use cases. One is sitting as the vSwitch in the infrastructure, the other one is sitting inside the network functions themselves. Most of what we've talked about today is focused on the infrastructure piece. My comment is, as an organization who plans to build cloud network functions using VPP, it's an area we find very little help, documentation, reference examples, people have ever heard of it. So as we talk about the ecosystem, it'd be interesting to hear the views on, there's a lot on the infrastructure, but that's kind of internal to us, and then it gets abstracted away when you go up to Kubernetes, because at that point, people just turn up and use it, and it works great, and that's fantastic. When it comes to actually an ecosystem of network functions, I think there's more help needed for people who are coming into this, because I think it's a very small number of network functions today, particularly microservice, containerized, cloud network functions that are using VPP. Nothing like as many as there should be.
Yeah, I think that's something actually we're sensitive to the fact that we need better examples there. There are a few that have been running loose that were built with VPP as classical VNFs, Cloud 1.0 VNFs in the ONAP community. And I think there's some effort underway right now to turn those into cloud native network functions, CNFs. And I hope that would actually give us really good examples to work from.
So is that an action item?
It's one that's actually already in motion.
Okay. Good. Anything else from the audience at this moment? Okay. All right, I'll just keep asking. So, since we are here and we are doing this presentation here at KubeCon, and we've talked a lot today about the sort of role of FIDO in cloud native. We've been talking about some plugins. One of the things, sort of OPNFV as an organization, this is drawing on some of my background, basically everyone has been upstream to us, right? So OpenInterview is always going out and sort of interacting with other communities. I think, as we go into this cloud native thing and we start looking at, maybe network service functions, we've got all these plugins between Kubernetes and different cloud projects, CNCF projects, and FIDO. What are some thoughts about how, we want to, kind of make ourselves either more comprehensible or ideas around how we want to sort of build the collaboration between sort of the FIDO community and the Kubernetes networking communities? And this I might be interested, if there are folks in the room who are more on the Kubernetes side, what would y'all like to see from FIDO in terms of wanting to collaborate with you? How can we best approach you sort of on your terms? That Dave Neary from Red Hat has in the past gave a great presentation that when you start getting involved with an upstream community, sort of the good ways to behave, like don't show up and tell them that they're wrong about everything and they should work differently or anything like that. So I'm just kind of curious. I think that there's a lot of fruitful possibility for collaboration. So how do we as FIDO sort of do that well?
Okay, so yeah, I'm from the Kubernetes networking community, and this is all new to me, and I'm not quite sure I've figured out what's aspirational versus what's running today. So, first stupid question, right? If if random deployer goes to instructions in Kubernetes for how to deploy Kubernetes, you get your list of supported kinds of networking. There's Calico and there's Flannel and there's not VPP. Is it something I can just plug in and run like I could Calico? And if so, it would behoove you to get on that, page of, that list that everybody gets people get pointed to. So question and suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that does need to be taken as an action item. The Conti VPP stuff is very real, but we haven't quite gotten that up into the documentation yet, so we do need to do that.
And you're saying there's also sort of, is there a process by which it's demonstrated as sort of a supported sort of networking? Is there a process, or just get kind of VPP up there with kind of pointers to documentation?
It's pretty straightforward in the sense that I think the page I'm thinking about is not a certification process. It's send us a pull request that points to your directions.
I'm not aware of a certification, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. So I'm not real clear on it. There's probably more than one list. Okay, so for example, if you go to the KubeADM page, KubeADM mentions a few. If you go to the big general install Kubernetes, there's it's sliced and diced a half a dozen different ways. There are a number of ways into Kubernetes, but I haven't noticed VPP mentioned in any one of them.
Good point. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so right now, just I've never visited your website until this morning. So, so first things first, it was really hard to find the source code. There was like very small icon just on the right with the GitHub, and it's for the GitHub, and also so that you have a Gerrit. So it's like in two places in the same time, and I saw that you're not mirroring it, or.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, Ed, because I think my experience is kind of happened just a few months ago. I felt the same, right? And what somehow might be distracting, because you're new and you're trying to get all these informations, etc. The fact that some stuff is on a normal web page or front end, and then you have to go and navigate a wiki, and sometimes from the wiki you might be redirected to what is the proper automated VPP documentation to look at some other stuff. So actually one of my comments I think earlier on I wanted to make is that we may be doing a better job in what we document, because documenting VPP source codes, it's going to be pointless, right? The code changes so often, so quickly that documentation will be dead after a couple of weeks. but documenting the starting point for people to learn quick and get familiar with things as the onboarding kind of as we grow. I think it's needed so that basically people don't get lost at the first 10 minutes and they say, oh no, this is too complicated. Because some people, some people like to hit their head and do stuff and try stuff. Other people just give up. And I suppose we don't really have to lose the ones that give up. We need to encourage people to participate and learn.
My main concern is that I was first when I clicked on the GitHub link, there was only like small amount of documentation there. Then in some of the links on the website, you're directed to the wiki.fd.io, and then there is also a link to the Gerrit. So I'm not sure which is the source of truth.
Well, eventually you get the.
Sorry. I can clarify that, which is the GitHub is purely a mirror of the Gerrit. So it just mirrors whatever's happening in Gerrit. Gerrit is when where the contribution takes place.
And we use Gerrit for reviews, right?
Okay, but just to clarify, the point of documentation is very valid. In fact, there's an effort underway to kind of once you land on the main page on FD.io, where there will be like a getting started page that is being created by some folks, including Intel, Varlese out there with that as well. So we should have that live in the next 2 weeks. But if you need immediate help, I mean, just email the alias. They have people
and yeah.
Just put like somewhere in the description of the receiver poster that this is a mirror of whatever it's mirrored from. So I know where I need to go.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
I'm actually taking notes. All right. Okay. Any other sort of suggestion? Yeah. Right. Do you want to run the mic over, Ed?
Oh, sorry.
I gave you one task.
It's on record. One job. One job.
So, okay. So I think it's actually a great panel for this question. So, if we had been here, if you wind the clock back 10 years ago, nobody would have been talking about user space networking. Okay, nobody would have talked about user space networking as a trend, or there certainly would have been less talk about user space networking. So, how pervasive do you see user space networking become? Is it still something that you still think it's something that is a niche thing, or do you see it becoming more pervasive over time?
Well, my experience is the default, they always use the kernel stack. And it's reliable. People have been using that. And it has a lot of tools to debug, to trace, to everything. The user space network stack, as long as you're missing something, people are not intend to use that. For example, you have to show that this really stable stack compared to kernel. So it takes a lot of effort to convince the user. I feel like the DMM gives some edge into that problem because to the customer, we can say, if you want to use some specific feature of this new stack, you can deploy this way. And if you are not satisfied in some other situation, you can keep using your original stack. It's a connection by connection selection. In my experience, I don't think user space network stack are as popular as kernel yet. But there are a lot of situations you probably have to go that way and to add some value to your product. Otherwise, it's hard to differentiate what you offer.
So my view, when I started leading TPDK 10 years ago, because that was the time. I thought it was just a POC, right? And look at what has become. Everybody knows about it, and it's part of VPP and many other products. My take is for Userspace networking, I think the big push will be given by containers. The more people will start using containers and deploy what a VNF today is on a virtual machine to a CNF. So the more that will take place, I think the more it will become important to have a user space networking stack, because then you really start appreciating what being cloud native means and being quick and fast and reliable. I completely agree on the points that it's really, really hard to convince people that have been using 30 years of technology, tested and used by so many people, by so many servers, etc., that now your stack performs as good as the previous one. Usually change is always scary for everyone, so I understand that. But I think the push will be given by the cloud stuff, by the container stuff.
So I don't think I have enough experience to actually answer this question, but I don't think it's really all that new in terms of kernel bypass. If you rewind 10 years, it might be the case that there are products or boxes that employ kernel bypass or even run software on specialized hardware where there might not even be the concept of a traditional host OS with all the great facilities of like a package manager or whatnot. Today, it seems like there's more of a conversation around that because there are more options, but as you pointed out, in the two of your talk, it's not enough. There needs to be some sort of solution to be able to understand whether it works for the person and how well it works for the person in terms of their use case. Yeah.
Just want to add one more thing. I think the move of user space networking stacks can be also seen by the adoption of XDP as well as a technology, where people really are trying to take their own software implementations of some networking stack and run it or offload it to the hardware or piece of it. So I think that's also going to push this further ahead.
So can I ask a follow-on question? So you sort of partially answered it, Marco. People really care about performance. But all your answers were sort of related to the NFV or VNF or CNF functions. But could you maybe comment on where you see a user space networking and what role you see playing in the non-VNF space, and what sort of workloads would they be? Because you said container is likely to change to drive the demand. Is it just the network functions, or there are other types of workloads that are likely to do that?
I'll try this. So an example that comes to my mind is to do with Cilium, for example, right? And the integration again with XDP. So the big thing in that perspective I see is that they don't longer use what IP tables has been for 25 years on Linux, but instead they use this new approach to come up with an ACL type of functionality. Why? Well, because that's very fast. It can be precompiled, whatever, offloaded. But again, it can be offloaded also to the hardware. So when people talk about hardware offload, and Damien has been working on that for I suppose, for what I've understood about hardware offloading things. So that's pretty interesting about performance, right? and it's also about what you can then move from being a software-only piece to be a hardware piece, and play with those components.
So would you put an equal sign between the cloud native, the cloud part, which is really part of the internet, the network I/O part, and the caring about network performance, where XDP and VPP clearly play, XDP in kernel and VPP in user mode?
Would I do what? I think.
Would you put sorry, this is the mic. Would you put an equal sign between the cloud native workloads, so the workloads that actually do rely on cloud, the internet, and the demand for more optimized network I/O, which is what user mode networking stack like VPP gives. So any cloud native workload should actually care about that.
I would say that if you are going to run your workloads in a container, it means that you are definitely interested in performance, right? One way or the other, because that's to bootstrap very quickly, or because you want really close to bare metal performance. And when we're talking about close to bare metal performance, you're talking about line rate, which could be 10 gig, 25 gig. People are talking 100 gigabits, right? So from that perspective, you do require a very, very fast and performance stack. And in my mind, BPP is sitting there, and other technology like XDP these days are also offering ways to make things going better or better performance. So yeah, I don't know if necessarily it's an equal sign, but it's close to or more than 90% equal, right?
Cool. All right, well, I have another question for the panel. Do we have any more questions for the audience? Because I might make this the concluding question. Okay, so Ed, do you want to?
One job. Very much. This is just a quick question because there's, I would say, like two different type of users. I mean, developers that want to go understand the code, and some other users that just want to run VPP. For those, I think it'll help them to just see what VPP offers to them in a simple example. Let's say you just run a web server in a pod, and if you use VPP as your networking plugin, you're gonna get 30% performance increase, something like that. And this is the YAML file to deploy VPP as your networking plugin. Something as simple as that will help you get like critical mass. Just an idea. I mean, because from my perspective, having used VPP for 2 years as a user, I'm not a developer. I think the current kind of approach is kind of oriented to NFV, like very networking oriented. So, and the rest of the people, like most of the people that is coming to this conference, it's from the other side, from the other part of the world. I mean, if you know what I mean. So you need to kind of show them or provide examples that are closer to their scenarios, to their use cases. It's just an idea.
Sorry, I take this back. Sorry. I think we do have quite a bit of that, to be honest with you. Or at least there are examples of, for example, how you set up a VPP using, how do you set up VPP for routing or for bridging, how you can basically use the feature of the ACL to do, mangling.
No, what I'm looking is how do you replace Calico with VPP? Like, this is just the YAML file. I mean, right. Just install it.
It's like what I was saying, okay? If I'm a regular Kubernetes person who never cared about NFV, I just want to run applications and services, okay? I can find instructions for how to install Kubernetes. I can find instructions for how to use Calico. Instructions for how to use Flannel. Okay? In the same way, in the same place, I don't find instructions for how to use VPP. I don't see a description of, if I'm concerned about applications, is it going to benefit me? And, right? Is it going to be, is it going to be 20% faster than Open vSwitch? Is it, how does it compare to what I'm used to?
Okay. So again, this may be a little bit different from what you exactly asked, but so for example, VPP, when we release a package like a full release tarball, we have packages for different distributions as well, and you can, for example, for SUSE, which I maintain the package for, you could, if you're using then an OpenSUSE distribution, you could simply do zipper in VPP, and that will install VPP. However, that is very, very different from configuring VPP, which is your, for example, vSwitch, as your you mentioned Open vSwitch, to do a VXLAN tunnel and bridging traffic or redirecting traffic or doing ACL mangling with the traffic itself, right? So from that perspective, I don't think that you can really say this is a YAML file and
One job. So, you know, this has actually come up quite a few times in conversations within the community recently, which is that we have a deficit of what I'd almost call how-to documentation or how-to information, which is, because I think we really think about two kinds of FIDO consumer. We've got hardcore software engineers, but then we also have DevOps engineers, you know, people who really consume what it is we produce. And I think we have a deficit of useful information, and actually on both counts that we need to go plug. So, you know, and I think your point is really well made, that, hey, if I'm a DevOps engineer and I'm trying to bootstrap a Kubernetes environment and I want to use VPP potentially in that environment, how do I get there? And we don't have a good, I don't think we have good documentation or good help for that. Do we?
So
Yeah, I was going to say, Brian, while Ed takes the microphone, I think you wanted to jump in and make a point?
Yeah, one poll is, I've noticed that VPP is documentation as wiki, and other alternatives are documentation as code. So is there a trend between whether documentation is more up-to-date one way versus the other?
Basically, we need to suck you in enough that it's even worth spending the time to figure out the code base for real and to lower the initial barrier of entry. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
To your point, if you just visit contiv/VPP, it has a full documentation of how you deploy.
I already found it, but I knew from this presentation that has a VPP plugin. On the FD website, there was no link for this. So I had to know that Cognitive had a...
Yeah, but the documentation there is it's really good, so you can deploy and... To the point that how do you deploy VPP with Kubernetes, it's a very extensive documentation with step-by-step things to do.
So would it be fair to say, one of the recurring themes I think I've heard here today, right, is that at the very minimum, we have a substantial linkage problem in the sense that if you try and go to the most obvious place to find something out, it is not clear how to get from that most obvious place to where the documentation may or may not exist. And so, and the linkage problem is in some sense the most tragic, because if you have good documentation and no one can find it, you have spent energy that is not helping your user. And so I think that's a really big takeaway that I'm hearing from a lot of you.
And I think it's just a sign of the fact that, you know, FIDO, particularly VPP, is going, you know, if you look at the FIDO website, it really looks like it's built by the community, for the community, and that's great. But at some point, you've got to go from by the community for people other than the community, and that's what you don't get. You don't get, hey, if you're interested in finding more about it and contributing, go over here. If you want to make this work, here's the 40-point font size on the homepage that says, you know, I want to click that, and I want to how to. And from that, I will get to love it, and then I'll spend the time to discover other aspects.
And I think that's a somewhat of a maturity kind of aspect too. You know, like when you launch an open source project, your sort of initial focus typically is the developers that you want to contribute to that project to get it to a point where it is usable, and then you have to start shifting your focus to the consumers, to the users, and what they need to know, and why they need to know it. And yeah. Yeah. Ed, Jerome's a little hard to hear.
One of the problems is VPP is just an engine, right? It's not a solution in itself. So it comes with other projects like networking VPP if you want to integrate it in OpenStack, or Contiv if you want to integrate it in Kubernetes. Probably we can make a better job at advertising these other projects beside VPP in itself.
Just to give you one example, I mean, at ONS, there was someone that didn't use Contiv, but used just VPP to orchestrate, I mean, to kind of provide a multi-cluster Kubernetes. So they just use VPP. So you can actually just use VPP for this. I know. So it's confusing. You can go to Contiv documentation, but why would you do Contiv and VPP? I mean, there's no clear distinction between the two. And I'm not saying it's bad documentation, because I do understand that, because I also come from the networking world. Just trying to look at those things with another set of eyes. I mean, trying to put yourself in the position of someone that doesn't have a clue about networking. They just want to use it.
Yeah. Sounds like we probably have some more education, and dare I even say marketing, kind of to do to sort of this community. I mean, we definitely came out of the NFV world because that was the pressing problem, right? Like, how do we get packet performance on commodity hardware to enable network-based services? But I think as we're sort of expanding kind of, our interests, it's something to do. So, yes.
I just wanted to add, right, this is basically VPP that has been developed by engineers, and it's not gotten to a point where we're doing a very good of a sales job. We need to do a better sales job, right? Yeah. We need to improve the documentation. We need to show where else FIDO/VPP is useful, and I think based on what we just heard, we'll get to it, and if there's any volunteers to help us get there, that's even better.
Yep. All right, cool. All right, so I think we may have actually just answered this question, but I kind of wanted to sort of maybe kind of end with one last question for the panel, and then we can wrap up since we are, a bit over time, which has been the theme of the day. But there have been a lot of great conversations and a lot of great content. So, so my final question to y'all is kind of in the next, say, 12 months, from your perspective as kind of longer term or new FIDO community members, what do you think is sort of most important for the FIDO community for us to sort of be successful, and you might also therefore need to define what you consider success as well. So,
okay, trying to be fun, documentation.
Okay.
Jokes aside, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to very closely work with people that are using Kubernetes and are focusing on the workloads from a cloud native perspective, to make sure that requirements can be captured, understood by the community, the developers, so that basically can be translated in code for VPP. That's my perspective.
Yeah, so besides documentation for new users, I would say being able to have flexibility in terms of platforms that you run on and different types of acceleration or offload that might be available in the underlying hardware platform. VPP is a lot of different things at different layers of the whole VPP stack. So.
Just from a DMM project point of view, that's what I have experienced, that I would like to know that this thing, does it really solve a real problem or not? So I like to get help from community that there's a real case that you can help to resolve. I think for open source community, it would not be a good idea just open source for the sake of open source. Engineering just for the sake of engineering. To have the real user case is what I really want to focus on.
Cool. And I'll actually just kind of, because folks were kind of talking about sort of being Kubernetes operators. One of the things within LF networking that we're launching right now is sort of an end user advisory group. And right now it is very much sort of the traditional telecom operators who are populating that. I think if stuff like FIDO starts to become of more interest to sort of this different community, if anyone here would be interested, I'd love to maybe sort of get either sort of, I don't know, in Kubernetes, but then sort of towards us, or maybe sort of within that end user advisory group, having sort of a small kind of like focus group of sort of Kubernetes operators, so that to your point, we are getting kind of the user requirements and end user needs to help guide the developer work. We definitely have a within the LF networking projects, our end users do tend to mostly be at this juncture the big telecom operators. But I mean, I think some of our technology definitely has applicability to a wider thing, but we're not necessarily, either selling to them and also not listening to them probably in the way that we ought to. So that's just a pitch to sort of also kind of like bring, maybe we figure out a venue, but like, kind of bring your requirements to us as well. So, assuming that you have any, that, this is going to be interesting to folks. And just a reminder, so a couple logistical things. I've been asked about the presentations. So Celia Stamp from the events team will be sending an email to all the speakers with a link to upload your presentations into the site. And that will make them available on the KubeCon site. So I think she's sending that out sort of today. So speakers, get your presentations uploaded, and then so for folks who want to be able to access those, we'll have that. And then obviously we have been recording this. When that has been sort of divided up and edited, we'll be posting that. And so materials will be made available. And we do have a FIDO booth. So when the sort of show opens for the big conference, I think we've got some demos in there. I think some of the vendors that you've been hearing from today are having some FIDO demonstrations in some of their booths. So definitely, if you want to kind of continue the conversation, come check out some of the demos and some of the stuff that we're doing and get more information. And I think this is great. Thank you all for your time and attention, participation, your questions, your comments, your observations. I thought this was a great day, and thank you to all of our speakers.
Thank you.